In with me to talk about that and some of today's other big stories, former Brexit Party MEP and talkTV presenter, of course, Ms. Alex Phillips. Alex, a very good morning to you.
Good morning, Mike.
Now, it will come as no surprise to you that when we asked the viewers of this great station whether the government was doing enough to tackle the asylum backlog, 96% of them said no, absolutely not. You know, the Stop the Boats slogan, which Rishi Sunak issued to us back at the beginning of this year, has done absolutely nothing to stop the boats. They've now issued another statement saying they're going to move them out of hotels into cheaper hotels, but it now appears they haven't got a plan for that either.
Yeah, I mean, the problem we have more than anything is the fact that even when these people are being processed, a lot of them are going to be granted right to remain because we have such a floppy and porous immigration set of laws that basically you can turn around and say, I'm a homosexual coming from a country where I'm persecuted for being gay. Well, that's about 3/4 of countries in the world. I'm coming from extreme poverty. That's 17 billion odd people. I'm connected to people traffickers who want to put me into slavery. I mean, what do you think this route is being used for? And so if the government do expedite the process of these applications, we're just going to see many of them granted the right to remain, which will contribute to a pull factor. What we need to do is get a grip of the situation from the very core and say that the UK simply cannot sustain the numbers of people coming in legally and illegally. We've got to turn the boats around and say, if you come to this country illegally, you will immediately be sent back to France because you're their problem, not ours. And we need to have a real conversation about who these people might be, because of course there are going to be people fleeing conflict zones. We've seen more conflict and unrest in the Middle East as we speak right now. But when people are coming from those areas, you have no guarantee that you're getting the persecuted. You might be importing the persecutors. And a great many people getting on these boats don't share our national values. They don't share our culture. And it's very hard to distinguish, especially with the interview process where it's basically, well, give me your word that you're a good person. Give me your word that you're fleeing something dreadful. Give me your word that you're here for the right reasons. It's very difficult to be able to ascertain whether or not what people are telling you is valid, particularly when they throw passports into the sea. It is a security threat, amongst other things.
It really is incredible, isn't it? I mean, you and I, Alex, have been talking about this for more years than I care to remember. What is it about the government that finds them incapable of just getting to grips with something? You know, they've issued all sorts of, pathetic attempts to try and fix things. We've had the Rwanda scheme. We've had Priti Patel claiming that she's going to do a deal with the French. We've had UK forces sent into the Channel to patrol it. Navy ships have been in there. Now they've gone. They couldn't do any good. I mean, I find it amazing. I mean, when you and I talk about this, whether we're on air or not, it's not that difficult, surely, to make a difference, is it? They don't seem to be able to do anything.
This is what I don't understand. They seem to be constantly very squeamish about what other people might think of them. The tiny percentage of people who think ex-student accommodation is not good enough for an Albanian criminal coming into the country illegally, that in fact even a hotel room without good internet isn't good enough for someone from the Punjab trying to break into the black market over here, that instead they should be given, I don't know, suites in the Ritz. And I don't understand where this has come from, because when you compare the way we treat people entering the country illegally, look at other countries such as Germany. They use old army bases. They use makeshift accommodation. Places like Greece and Italy use tents and camps. And this is absolutely fine according to UN diktat. We are more than able to do that and create mass accommodation and not make it so wonderful that people think, well, this is great. If I come to the UK, I'm going to have a doctor 24 hours a day. I'm going to have 3 hot meals. I'm going to have pocket money. And I'm going to have at least 2 years to make friends and work out how I'm going to stay here. I mean, I am not saying when people are genuinely fleeing persecution that they should be treated inhumanely. Absolutely not. And I think as a nation, we've always been very, very good at making sure that we take people in from Hong Kong, from Ukraine, from Afghanistan, although that particular process was an absolute disaster and a mark of shame on this country. But what we have now is when you've got these illegal passages is essentially hardened criminals and criminal cartels connected to terrorist networks exploiting our borders potentially for nefarious ends. And even if the people on those boats aren't themselves going to be connected to crime, the proceeds, the amount of money they're paying to get here certainly are.
Well, that's the problem. And of course, many of them are not necessarily paying a price to physically get here, but what they're doing is indebting themselves to the people traffickers so that when they do get here, they then have to work off what they owe them. And they end up unfortunately, working in some kind of nefarious business, some kind of criminal enterprise, or, you know, working in people trafficking themselves. And we also know that the Afghanistan sort of airlift that didn't work for everybody that should have been airlifted out means that we're now paying people in Pakistan to put up an awful lot of Afghan refugees in Pakistani hotels, again, charged to the taxpayer. I mean, the Home Office seems to have a bottomless pit of money. We also learned this week that North Eye prison down in Bexhill in Sussex, they've now bought for 10 million quid. 15 million quid, even though it was bought the previous year by some rather clever business people for about 6.
Yeah, I mean, the government seem to get this wrong at every single step, don't they? They don't seem to have a credible or valid plan. And it's almost as if they want to tie themselves in knots and not enable themselves to develop a credible plan. Because the minute someone with blue hair and a placard turns up somewhere and slow walks in front of a bus or says, you know, this particular type of accommodation is almost akin to being a prison, the government seem to get extremely squeamish about doing anything. They'll talk the talk, won't they, behind podiums and plinths to try and sort of garner support and patience from the ordinary British person watching the news and getting frustrated. But this never gets translated into action. I think there's a lot of pushback from lily-livered types in the Home Office, in the civil service. I think there's a lot of litigation that's taking place, human rights lawyers, immigration lawyers, constantly foiling the government at every step. But at the end of the day, the buck does stop with the government. And I think they really need to just roll their sleeves up and say, we're going to start turning boats around. We're going to create very temporary makeshift accommodation, like it or lump it. You know, you don't have a choice here. If you're fleeing persecution, you should just be grateful, frankly, to be somewhere that is safe and that you're not going to be persecuted, that you are protected. I'm not saying inhumane conditions, but I think this sort of, I remember after COVID, homeless people were put in hotels during the pandemic because it was deemed to be a public health risk to have these people living informally on the streets. They were thrown out of hotels. Nobody seemed to protest this. No. Nobody said we're treating people living on the margins in our own society who have had chaotic upbringings, who have drug issues, who are ex-veterans. They need respect and they need protection. No, they were treated like rats who are viable to be thrown out onto the street to make space for people coming from other countries. And I never understand why more regional countries in the Middle East, in the Muslim world, in sub-Saharan Africa aren't doing more themselves. We should be focusing on helping those countries take in refugees, even if it does mean sending them a bit of money. The end point shouldn't be the United Kingdom.
No, it shouldn't. But as you say, you know, Britain prides itself on being a welcoming country, but the limit is fast reaching, you know, the end point, because people in this country are sick to death of this kind of constant flow of people. And it also badly affects, does it not, Alex, those who do actually perhaps need a bit of refuge. For example, if people were fleeing bombs in Israel or in the West Bank, and you wanted to house them here, I would say the people's response to that would be, actually, not today, thank you, because we've got enough people coming already. So the impact on these, on genuine refugees is actually going to be worse for them. And also, how do Egypt and Jordan get away with saying, oh, we don't want any Palestinians? Because if we said it, we would be the pariahs of the world.
Yeah, no, exactly. This is my concern very much, because the Muslim world tends to shut its doors to people who they don't see as coming from their particular tribe of Islam, or people who they might think themselves are connected to forms of extremism. They don't want them. And so they're happy to see these people coming over here. And you're absolutely right. For those people who are genuine refugees, and my heart really goes out to them, because there are plenty of insecure countries in this world, and there are people fleeing terrible things that we would find unimaginable in the West. I would like to think that anyone in this country would say,
just lost
you need to be protected and you need a chance. But you know, what we have now is the hardening of public opinion, simply because, as you said, the system is chaotic.
Yeah, it really is. Let's talk about Nigel Farage again this morning, because, I mean, just when you thought it was safe to go back into the banking world, it turns out that a new report has dropped this morning, produced by Travers Smith. This is a law firm that was actually asked to do an investigation into what went on at NatWest, as if they didn't know. It now turns out that they've had a look, and they've decided that while the woman who used to run it, Dame Alison Rose did in fact leak information, private confidential information in breach of data protection laws to a journalist that she knew was a journalist, she made an honest mistake and didn't do anything wrong.
Yeah, honest mistake. I'm sorry, but actually, when she disclosed the private information about Nigel Farage's bank account to the BBC business editor, the next day the BBC business editor phoned up to double check about the release of this information, and she said, "Yes, go ahead, say that we closed this account for commercial reasons." When clearly all of the information that he's been able to get to explain what went on behind the scenes shows a very different picture, and it does look like a whitewash, doesn't it? It does look like the establishment and the banking sector marking their own homework. NatWest commissioning this particular investigation, this inquiry. They, of course, own Coutts Bank and saying, well, some mistakes were made, but not really anything that big. I mean, the problem NatWest have here, of course, is if it's proven, and I think it has been proven essentially demonstrably, that they have released private data, that they are debanking people for political reasons, then this is potentially going to impact on things like their share price, which could do a great deal of damage to the bank. It has financial repercussions, but it's very good in many respects that Nigel's been the person to put his head above the parapet and raise this issue, because I think we're beginning to learn now that lots of people around the country, whether it's a small business or a private individual, does not have an access to bank accounts. And you'd think in this day and age, that is almost a utility. It's an absolute obligation. When cash is no longer really the main form of currency, so many payments are happening online. Everybody needs a bank account. And so it's raising a very important issue.
It is, but what it's also done is uncovered a rather seamy, horrible, nasty kind of underbelly of people in the what we call the lefty establishment now in this country. And you would never have thought, certainly when I was younger, that it would include banks. You know, you always thought banks were full of stuffy men in sort of, you know, Turnbull and Asser shirts walking out to a private club for lunch. But what we've got instead is a bunch of beardy kind of, you know, Ramonas. Nigel himself this morning in a statement says, this comes as little surprise to me given Travers Smith, the law firm, has an emeritus chair by the name of Chris Hale, who's a pro-Remain lawyer who once described Brexiteers as racist and xenophobic. I mean, are these people ever going to accept that the people of this country actually voted to leave the European Union?
I mean, snobbery is the new Gucci handbag, isn't it? I think what happened basically in the 21st century is things that were the privilege of those with money, foreign holidays, nice new cars, so on and so forth, smartphones are now accessible to the vast majority of people, be they through reduction in prices, finance schemes, so on and so forth, short haul easy jet flights to the sunshine. And so now what people have to do to basically show that they are a level above, to demonstrate that they are the elite, is adopt these luxury ideologies that I'm not stupid, I'm not a racist, I'm not an idiot. Because the thing is about these luxury ideologies, whether they be things like immigration or Brexit, is it those at the very bottom of the ladder who are impacted by it, who are impacted by wage compressions, who are impacted by massive existential changes to the high street and their communities, those who employ nannies or like going to, the barista at their local coffee shop and paying £5 for a latte, those who are at the top of the ladder who own businesses who actually get huge dividends from being able to compress the wages of those at the bottom, think that, the sort of trappings of globalization are all very wonderful. And so the way in which they are able to distinguish themselves from those at the bottom is adopting essentially this new form of snobbery, which is veiled in a sort of faux morality.
Yeah, it's absolutely dreadful, ghastly. So let's hope that she doesn't actually walk away, Dame Alison Rose, with the amounts of money that she could walk away with. Surely to God they will withhold some of it, because at the moment it looks as if there is no punishment that she's going to face whatsoever, and she's going to become a very much wealthier woman over the course of the next 12 months. But one final thing for you, Alex. I don't know if you're in London this weekend, but, I'm slightly concerned about what we're likely to see. We know, basically, that the pro-Palestinian march last Saturday was massive. We also know, I know, just because it happened very near me, that there were a couple of impromptu sort of protests, one in the Limehouse Link Tunnel where a load of Palestinian flags were being flown from cars and a load of cars just stopped and honked their horns. Similarly, something happened like that in Tower Hamlets. The police are saying that they're prepared. We've now got Sadiq Khan, the mayor, urging a ceasefire. Let's have a look at what he's got to say.
I joined the international community in calling for a ceasefire. It would stop the killing and would allow vital aid supplies to reach those who need it in Gaza. But a widespread military escalation will only deepen the humanitarian disaster. It will increase human suffering on all sides. No nation, including Israel, has the right to break international law.
Yeah, thanks, Sadiq. Slightly overreaching his remit there, I'm afraid, but I mean, hardly surprising. I mean, I pointed out to him there was a ceasefire, actually. It got stopped on October the 7th by Hamas.
Yeah, I mean, where was him asking for Hamas to release the 200 odd captives, the people being held prisoner under Gaza? Because that would probably stop Israel bombing Gaza pretty quickly if the hostages were set free. Where is the condemnation of that? What did he mean when he said no country, not even Israel, can break international law? That sounded to me fairly loaded and fairly unpleasant. And what I don't understand is this is the new trendy ideology, isn't it, to be pro-Palestine? No one seemed to bat an eyelid or take to the streets as Saudi Arabia bombed Yemen. Nobody seems to be turning out in their tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands to protest political persecution and the treatment of women in Iran. Somehow Palestine is a way that a lot of Muslims who have come to this country get together and say we're going to form solidarity around this issue because it's a them versus us. It's the white Western world as they perceive it, Judeo-Christian world versus the Muslim world. And I find that quite uncomfortable. I'm not saying that everyone part of those protests has that particular mindset, but it seems to me a lot of people there are turning up with audacity out of spite because they want to put two fingers up to the West, despite them coming here, living here, benefiting from our privileges and our prosperity, benefiting from the right to protest. They seem to have all centered around this particular issue to make some sort of greater ideological claim about the Judeo-Christian world versus the Muslim world. And I don't understand why, if they're so concerned about their Muslim brethren around the world, they're not protesting Saudi, they're not protesting Iran. And a lot of these people, I frankly think, when if you were to pull any of them out of the marches and give them a sort of blank world map and say point to Palestine, probably couldn't even do it.
No, I think that's absolutely right. Alex, great to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed. Looking forward to seeing you on Plank of the Week tonight at 7 p.m. and over the weekend, of course, as well. Alex Phillips, talkTV's very own presenter. She's also back next week with Kevin O'Sullivan as well.